Hello, rock and roll rebels, and welcome to another episode of Ramble On with Rosie. We are here to discuss the influence of one of the greatest works of literature on music. This particular book has influenced a lot of things, but we're going to discuss its influence on music. But before we dig into that, quick side note, as you probably noticed, this is getting put up on Monday, not Sunday. That's because now that I've found something of a social life, trying to record on a weekend and get this posted is just too much, so it's going to be a Monday thing. I may eventually move it to like Friday and record it earlier sometime during the week. We'll see, but for now it's Mondays, so it will not be posted on Sundays anymore. Just an FYI. But the topic is dun, 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 the Lord of the Rings, or in this case, the Lead of the Rings, because Led Zeppelin is one of the many artists we'll be discussing this week who has woven Tolkien into their musical output. So, starting off with the Mighty Zepp, they have three songs that refer to Tolkien's world. The most well known being Ramble On, of course, with the darkest depths of Mordor and Gollum and the Ring. There's several references in Ramble On to the world of Tolkien, which is pretty awesome. As a huge Tolkien nerd, you'll find out. I promise I will try my best to not go full Stephen Colbert here and like nerd out on Lord of the Rings to a disturbing extent, but I love me some Lord of the Rings, so bear with me. Hopefully I don't lose anybody. It's a big passion of mine, right up there with classic rock. Hence why this is the topic. Um, the other song that Led Zeppelin did that related to uh, Lord of the Rings is the Battle of Evermore, because there's references to ring race, and it does somewhat feel like it could reference the Battle of Pelennor Fields that happens in The Return of the King. It has that kind of vibe to it. So that's the other lyrical reference. Their third song that references Tolkien is the Misty Mountain Hop, which doesn't really reference it in the lyrics, but the Misty Mountains are a mountain range in Middle-earth, in Tolkien's world. So that is a reference, plus, I mean, the song's about smoking weed, and hobbits are big on their pipe weed, so I'm just saying. The hobbits, I could see them getting busted for being stoners in the park. That's all I'm gonna say. Another slight similarity between, or connection between Tolkien and Led Zeppelin is that J.R.R. Tolkien and John Paul Jones share a birthday. They were both born on January the 3rd, so that's pretty cool too. Hopefully Jonesy appreciates that. I feel like he did, because I mean, I know Plant was the big Lord of the Rings fan, but I feel like they all probably were somewhat. So, to the point that I have previously on fun little posts that I did back on one of my blogs a couple years ago, had a arrangement of the Fellowship of the Ring based off of Led Zeppelin and their various compadres like Richard Cole and Peter Grant assigned Lord of the Rings characters, because I'm a nerd like that. And I also rewrote the intro to the Lord of the Rings, where it's sort of like it began with the forging of the Great Rings. I was like, it began with the finding of the sixth string, because Jimmy Page finding the acoustic guitar in the house that his parents moved into when he was like 11 seems like some fated destiny thing, like Frodo and, Bilbo finding the ring. So, like I said, I'm a big Lord of the Rings nerd. I'm gonna try and keep this sane, but it's really hard to not, go full nerd here, so please bear with me. Um, Moving on to a slight connection, as I was talking about last week, Jimmy Page had that XYZ project with former members of Yes. However, the member of Yes we're going to be discussing was not one of those. That would be Rick Wakeman, who in 2001, or rather 2002, did an entire album based off of and inspired by the Lord of the Rings. If you're familiar with Wakeman, he's done this with other topics. He had his Six Wives of Henry VIII album, which I loved as a kid, and also the one based off of King Arthur and the Journey to the Center of the Earth. So this is totally in his wheelhouse, and he does excellently. It's just called The Songs of Middle-earth. It's really good. Also in that prog rock vein, back in like the late 60s, early 70s, there was this British prog rock band called Camel, and they did a song titled Nimrodel, the Procession, and the White Rider, sort of like a three-part song. All those things, at least especially Nimrodel and the White Rider, relating to Tolkien, because Nimrodel is the name of a river in Middle-earth. It's also the name of a legendary character that the river was named after, and the White Rider is another name for Gandalf once he comes back as Gandalf the White. And then another classic rock big name, heavyweight, is Jack Bruce, former bass player and singer for Cream, and on his Songs for a Tailor album, he has a song called To Isengard. Um, and it just has the Tolkien title, but the lyrics are very evocative of things that are in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So like eagles and some of the imagery he's using is very ties in with the work of Lord of the Rings. Another artist who does similarly is Rush. Rush does has their song Rivendell, which doesn't explicitly name anything Tolkien in the lyrics like Jack Bruce didn't in To Isengard, but the lyrics are very much evocative of what's going on in the books with the imagery they use and the things that they're choosing to describe. So they're like basically it seems like we're using this title for this song to tell you that it's inspired by Tolkien, but we're not gonna like completely freak you non-Tolkienian, non-ringers out by like putting a bunch of stuff that's just gonna confuse you in the lyrics. So which is appreciable. Um, Another artist who does similarly is Joni Mitchell, only she does it the other way around, where there's no Tolkien reference in the title, but in the lyrics to the song, she does mention Wilderland, which is a region in Middle-earth. And while that may seem kind of subtle, because Wilderland doesn't you could hear that and think it's from any sort of fantasy fiction, or even like an actual place. It doesn't sound super Tolkien, but it is. But Joni Mitchell in interviews did elaborate that it was inspired by Tolkien, and specifically like she really enjoyed Galadriel, the Elf Queen's character, and that was sort of what she was drawing on when she was writing the song, which is I Think I Understand. And so more Tolkien references, and this we're still like pretty much hanging out in the 60s here, other than that one album by Rick Wakeman, who was an artist of the 60s and 70s, doing a 2002 album. But we will jump from Laurel Canyon to outer space, but still stay in the similar decade period, because Leonard Nimoy's delightful Ballad of Bilbo Baggins, which is very explicitly Tolkien, and it it's just fun and sweet and upbeat, and I really enjoy it. Very cheery song, and it's enjoyable. Besides, it's kind of funny thinking about Leonard Nimoy having a musical career when most of us just think about him as Commander Spock. So, back out of outer space to the Renaissance Fair. This one is another silly Tolkien song. It's actually based on, there was a YouTube video back in the days of like viral YouTube videos before we had all the other social media to distract us. People would frequently do like mashups of parts of films and sort of put them to song. And one of these viral video edits was they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, which if you know it, you know it. And if you don't, I highly recommend looking up the original video edit so you know what you're getting into, and then looking up the Dread Crew of Oddwood's performance of They're Taking the Hobbits to Isengard at a Renaissance fair. It's great. It is excellent, at least if you have the same kind of sense of humor and you're the same kind of nerd that I am, you will enjoy the heck out of this. Which, speaking of nerds, I love that, like, just in the past, like, artists we've discussed so far, we have established that, like, these cool rock gods that we all, like, hold in awe are all a bunch of giant nerds, same as the rest of us. So who said being a nerd wasn't cool? I'm like, Jimmy Page and Robert Plant are nerds. Somebody gonna tell me they're not cool? I'll wait, because I dare you to. So, yay for classic rock making nerds cool. And moving on from that fun little side note to something that's very Tolkien based was Sally Oldfield, who was a Irish folk artist, and she's the sister of Mike Oldfield, whose influential album Tubular Bells. She actually sings on one of the songs as a backing vocalist, and she adapts an entire passage from a Tolkien verse into her song Songs of the Quindi, which this brings up the really cool point that music is so integral to Tolkien's work. Like, be it Gandalf first shows up in the Shire at the beginning of the Fellowship of the Ring, or Bilbo singing when he's on his journeys. I mean, Bilbo going on a journey because a bunch of dwarves sang in his kitchen and he decided that, hey, that mountain with the dragon sounds pretty cool. Honestly, I think I'm down to go visit and help y'all get your gold back. I mean, the power of song. 13 dwarves convinced him to go attack a mountain and a dragon because their song was that badass. So, like, the use is throughout the films. And it can be fun, happy, upbeat songs, like the songs that they sing in the pubs, with Merry and Pippin singing little bar shanties, or staying with the same characters when Pippin has to sing All Shall Fade to Stuart Denethor, while he's all worried about his friends. So, like, there's a lot of song use just in the films, and if you read the books, there's even more songs in the books. To the point that, not being a huge fan of poetry when I was in my teens, I kind of would skip the song portions because it broke the flow for me. I was sort of like, I don't know what to do with this. I don't like poetry. So I would skip the poetic bits. Now, I haven't done that in the time since I've read it, but back when the first time when I read the trilogy when I was 14, I kind of skipped some of the songs. My bad. But there's a lot of song use throughout, both in the books, especially in the books, and then in the films also. Also, can't forget the songs that they used in the films. Getting some rather notable artists to contribute. Probably the most well-known artist who contributed to the Lord of the Rings soundtrack would be Annie Lennox of Eurythmics, singing Into the West at the close of the Return of the King film during the end credits there, which is a beautiful song. I used to listen to it fall asleep in college because it's just so soothing, and it's kind of bittersweet. It's a really, really enjoyable number. I really enjoy it. But sticking with New Wave and with the Lord of the Rings soundtracks, Neil Finn, who was of the band Split Enz, and more recently has been part of Fleetwood Mac, sang possibly my favorite song from the six closing songs from the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings trilogies, which was the Song of the Lonely Mountain. I'm not per se gonna say it's like my favorite song out of all the songs, like if you took them outside of the soundtracks, but the use of it at the closing titles for The Hobbit Unexpected Journey was just masterful, because when I went and saw The Hobbit The Unexpected Journey in theaters in like 2012 or whenever it was it came out, it felt like I had went home. Like, I moved a lot as a teenager. Actually, my whole life. I've lived in over 30 different houses and over 10 different, well, I've lived in 10 different states. So, I didn't have a consistent, like, place to call home. So, reading Lord of the Rings starting in my, teens when I was like 13 or 14, Middle-earth became home for me. I'm like, this is my constant. The world of being a teenager makes no sense and I don't like it and I'm always moving. But I can always go just jump into Middle-earth, where I know what's going to happen, and I love these characters, and the landscape is so described so well that I can just go visit Middle Earth. So the use of the song of the Lonely Mountain at the end of the Unexpected Journey, the first of the films in the Hobbit trilogy, was so good. It just gave me chills. Like, I will never forget sitting in that theater having felt like I had went home for the last 2.5 hours, and then that song just like solidifying it hit me so hard. So it definitely has like the strongest emotional impact for me. There's other really good songs that they used. Billy Boyd's "The Last Goodbye" for the closing of the Battle of the Five Armies in credits was really good. For those of y'all not in the know, Billy Boyd is the actor who played Pippin in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, so it was a nice tie-in between all 6 films, and really good other songs that are on the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit films. The other one that's probably the most well-known is Enya's May It Be, which is from the end credits to The Fellowship of the Ring. For some reason, the middle 2 films of each trilogy, so the Desolation of Smaug and the Two Towers ending credit songs, are not that memorable. I think Ed Sheeran did the Desolation of Smaug end credit song that I don't remember the name of. And then the end credit song for Two Towers was called Gollum's Song, and it was some New Zealand artist, I believe, called like Emilia Torini did it, but not very memorable, either of them. Meanwhile, the beginning and end films of each trilogy have really good songs for their end credits, and Enya's is probably the most famous of those. She also contributed her vocals to a piece that made it in the film, which is like the love theme for Aragorn and Arwen. It's titled, excuse me if I'm butcher my Elvish pronunciations here. I love the books. I don't know how to say the words out loud very well sometimes. But Aeron, I believe, is how you'd say the title for the song. But it's also known as like the love theme for Aragorn and Arwen, and it's good. And that's not the only association with Tolkien that Enya has. All the way back on her like 1992-ish album, Shepherd Moons, there's a track named after the Golden Woods of Lothlorien, which is where Galadriel's from. So very in the into Tolkien even before there were any films to be into. Which honestly, everything I've mentioned musically outside of the soundtrack stuff, all that is prior to the films coming out. Give or take Rick Wakeman's Songs of Middle-earth, which came out roughly concurrent with the first films. Like The Fellowship of the Ring and that album came out within a year of each other. So, all these are like people just drawing inspiration off the books alone. Maybe the old cartoons, but I highly doubt it. So it's pretty much just the books, which is pretty cool that just the books with no supporting epic film trilogy, or 2 trilogies at this point, inspired this many people. And moving on from inspiration, it's not just Enya. There's a lot of other new age kind of sounding artists who are influenced by Tolkien. There's Enya, of course. David Arkenstone, literally his last name is an homage to Tolkien's work, because the Arkenstone is the rock that Thorin is after in the Hobbit films and, book, in case you didn't know. Highly recommend reading the books and watching the films, especially the extended editions of The Lord of the Rings, because it's the only way to watch The Lord of the Rings, if you're asking me. But I am a huge nerd. I can also hit y'all up if you like send me a message on Instagram at Ramble On with Rosie. You just find me and send me a message, and I can get you a link to a really good free audiobook that somebody did of Lord of the Rings, where they edited in the score from the films and ambient sounds. So, like, if they're being chased by horses, there's horse clopping in the background. And if they're at a bar, there's like that rough din of clinking glasses and indistinct voices. So, really immersive audiobook experience, which I enjoyed thoroughly and just finished going through, and recommend to anybody who wants to go through the trilogy for the first time, or a second time, or the seventh time, like me. I think I'm up to 7. I lost count. I've read it a few times. Really, really good audiobook. The guy does different voices for the different characters and does a really good job. And he like did it on his own, free hook, just because he loves the Lord of the Rings that much, which yet again says something to the influence of this work on people's not just, imagination, but like their heart, that it just brings them that much. I'm not sure if conviction is the correct word, but where they're just that into it that they'll do stuff like this for free just, because they enjoy it that much. So, that side note and shameless plug for everybody reading the trilogy, uh, aside, moving on, there's also another really cool artist that I just discovered in researching this episode. The artist, like David Arkenstone, has a directly Tolkien-based title. The band's name is the Galadrim, and from the one or two songs of theirs I listened to, I really liked their vocalist, and I'm a little picky on my female vocalists, but she sang really well, and the songs are pretty much all based on Tolkien as well, the songs that I found. So they're very Tolkien-titled, Tolkien-based lyrics, and the vocalist, she kind of reminded me of Candace Knight from Blackmore's Night, but not quite the same. But kind of similar and in that vein, which that's another band which I don't think they have any explicitly Tolkien-related songs, but Blackmore's Night just vibes Tolkien. Like, don't ask me why, it just does. And they're worth checking out anyways. I featured them in a Thundercrack around the holidays because they've got some really good songs. Richie Blackmore of Deep Purple is in this band with his wife. So, worth checking out all around. Moving on from that other recommendation to, I guess that is the perfect segue, because how do you jump from like new age and medieval folk music to heavy metal? Well, Richie Blackmore did it, because Deep Purple's kind of heavy metal, and he also does like new agey medieval folk music with his wife. So, he is the great connection here, because the other genre that loves Tolkien, aside from the New Agers, are the heavy metal bands, which there's nothing new there. I mean, Black Sabbath, probably the OG heavy metal band. Their song The Wizard was inspired by Gandalf. So it's been there as long as heavy metal has been around, to have a love of Tolkien. And it makes sense in some strange way, especially like songs that are metal that are about like the perspectives of the dwarves or of the people of Rohan. Like, they just seem metal. Like, dwarves seem like a bunch of metalheads. And I don't just mean that because the pun, because they're usually, blacksmiths and stuff. They just vibe like they'd be listening to metal. Maybe it's the Viking look that they have. Who knows? But metal and Tolkien have had a long and storied love affair. Like I said, starting with Black Sabbath, going all the way up to, like Megadeth with their song This Day We Fight, which is based on Aragorn's battle speech. I think the one that he gives when they're outside the Black Gate of Mordor. So there's a variety of Tolkien. Now, I will say, as I say metal and heavy metal, I know that there's a bunch of different nuances in metal, and somebody may be peeved that, like, this is this type of metal and it's not actually metal and I did it wrong, and that's symphonic metal and it's not the same thing. So bear with me. I'm not a huge metalhead, so if I didn't perfectly categorize everything into its nuanced genre of metal, I apologize. I'm just using metal as a broad, base for like the heavier vocal, lots of shredding kind of, music. Another song by a metal band that relates to Tolkien is Nightwish. They have a couple songs, but Elven Path is like the most well-known and notable Tolkien song that they have. But I want to say they have one or two other Tolkien songs as well. And like I said, I'm not a huge metalhead, but I do enjoy Blind Guardian, or at least the songs of theirs that I've listened to. In fact, their song, The Lord of the Rings, which when I first heard it was inaccurately labeled as being by Nightwish when it was actually Blind Guardian, uh, was like the first Tolkien-inspired song that I heard. I think I was looking for the Lord of the Rings soundtrack on LimeWire. Yes, I was a pirate when I was 12 years old. Now that I can afford to buy music, I buy music, but at 12 I could not afford to do so. So I was pirating on ye old Frostwire and LimeWire. I was too young for Napster. But I ended up with the inaccurately labeled Lord of the Rings when I was trying to get the soundtrack. And I liked it. The guy's vocals are really good. They're not as like singing out of the back of his head, deep throaty Viking metal vocals that lots of metal artists have, where I'm like, okay, this is not my thing. He's got a more nuanced voice, so I really like the singing done by the lead singer for Blind Guardian. And aside from their track titled Lord of the Rings, which is really good and sort of retells the inscription on the ring as well as like the backstory to what happened to those characters and such. Um, they had their song Nightfall is really good, like gives you chills, good. And it's based off of Tolkien's work The Silmarillion, in which he tells of the fall of like basically the Tolkien equivalent of Eden. So like back when everything was good and then bad showed up, and this is sort of like the evil entering the world is the song Nightfall. To without getting too nuanced and talking about the trees with the lights and all the really nerd stuff that I could do. Like I said, I'm gonna try not and go full Stephen Colbert here. But yes, basically, Nightfall is about the fall of the coming of evil into a otherwise perfectly good world that happens in Tolkien's The Silmarillion, which is sort of like a chronicle and a prehistory of like Middle Earth prior to The Lord of the Rings and Hobbit. And like I said, it's really good. Other notable Tolkien metal can be found by bands like The Windrose and Bloodbound, Dragonland, and Battlelore, and a few other. I found a Spotify playlist of like Tolkien metal songs. I also made a playlist of my own. Speaking of playlists, my friends and I, this is a couple years ago, made a playlist of songs to inappropriately tell the climax of Lord of the Rings by. And obviously we kicked that off with Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire, as one does. Bruce Springsteen's I'm on Fire. Timber by Kesha featuring Pitbull. And It's the End of the World as We Know It by REM, and a couple other numbers. We had several songs in there, but those were the notable ones that just really made me giggle thinking about someone editing the fall of Sauron and the tossing of the One Ring into the fires of Mount Doom, edited in with those songs. But that's the one playlist that we had long before I even had a podcast about music and was here to tell you about Lord of the Rings. The other thing is this week I asked my friends, like, if they could edit a classic rock song into a scene in Lord of the Rings, what song would it be and where would they put it? And so my friend Michael suggested Immigrant Song for the Ride of the Rohirrim when they show up at Minas Tirith to, come to the aid of Gondor, and, Theoden's running around singing death! Which pretty good spot to put the Immigrant Song. It's always good for battle, as Thor Ragnarok proved. My friend Jackie recommended Ramble On for obvious reasons, but she wanted to put it when Frodo and Sam are leaving after the breaking of the Fellowship. So like at the very end of the Fellowship of the Ring, which, I mean, honestly, they could have just used that song instead of Enya's May It Be, and I'd have been okay with it. Not that I dislike Enya, but come on, it's friggin' Led Zeppelin. Heck yeah, I'd love for them to have been on one of the songs for the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Wonder why that didn't happen. I feel like they could have at least gotten solo Robert Plant to do a song for the Lord of the Rings soundtrack. Regardless. And I'm trying to remember what my other friends' recommendations were. I think the one wanted Hooked on a Feeling by Blue Suede to be when Gollum finds the ring. And then my personal choice was going to be Season of the Witch by Donovan, when the Black Riders storm the Prancing Pony in Bree, and I just felt it would fit really well with the climactic pull that Season of the Witch has for like when they're stabbing up the pillows, and just sort of made sense for that whole sequence of scenes that take place at the Prancing Pony, in my mind at least. Also, it ties in with Led Zeppelin because Season of the Witch by Donovan has both Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones on the track. I believe Jones was not just playing bass but also arranging, and then Page contributed guitar. So we have come full circle back to Led Zeppelin, who, dun, 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 Jimmy Page had a birthday. So happy birthday, Jimmy Page. And on that celebratory note that the Dark Lord of the Guitar is still with us, I will bid y'all good day. Be kind to each other. Read Lord of the Rings, or go watch the movies, or all the above. And rock on, and I will talk to y'all next week.